The lonely encounter. Ethan sat alone in his small weathered cabin, the sound of the roaring wind outside making the walls creak. The nights on this distant planet were cold and unforgiving. With no other humans for miles, loneliness was his constant companion. He had chosen this life, far from the chaos of crowded colonies, but some nights, the silence was too much. The storm outside was fiercer than usual, and Ethan was about to settle in for the night when a faint sound caught his attention. It was a strange, almost musical cry, barely audible over the howling wind. He froze, unsure if his ears were playing tricks on him. But there it was again, soft, pleading cries, like the sound of a child in distress. Grabbing his jacket and an old flashlight, Ethan stepped outside. The wind whipped against his face, icy and relentless. He scanned the area, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the swirling snow. For a moment, there was nothing but the storm. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement near the edge of the rocky outcrop. Ethan approached cautiously. The cries grew louder, more desperate. As he rounded a boulder, he saw them. Two small figures huddled together, shivering in the cold. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. Their skin glowed faintly in the dark, a soft blue hue that pulsed like a heartbeat. Their bodies were frail, their limbs thin and delicate. One looked up at him with large, glistening eyes, filled with fear and exhaustion. For a moment, Ethan was too stunned to move. He had heard stories of alien life on the outer planets, but had never imagined he would encounter it. The twins were clearly starving, their glowing skin dim and dull. One of them whimpered, clutching the other, as if trying to shield them from the cold. Ethan's heart clenched. Whatever these creatures were, they were just children. He could see it in their trembling bodies and hear it in their cries. Without thinking, he took off his jacket and draped it over them. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the wind. "I won't hurt you." The twins flinched at first, but when they felt the warmth of his jacket, one of them reached out a frail hand. Ethan knelt down, speaking gently. "Come on, let's get you out of this storm." Carefully, he scooped them up in his arms. They were impossibly light, their glowing skin cold to the touch. As he carried them back to his cabin, he couldn't help but notice strange markings on their arms, intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dark. He didn't know what they meant, but they looked almost like scars. Once inside, Ethan set them down near the small heater in the corner of the room. The twins huddled together, staring at him with wide, cautious eyes. He rummaged through his supplies, finding a blanket and some leftover rations. "Here," he said, offering them a piece of bread. "It's not much, but it'll help." The smaller twin hesitated, glancing at the other as if seeking permission. Finally, they took the bread with trembling hands, breaking it in half to share. Ethan watched as they ate slowly, their glowing skin brightening ever so slightly. "Where did you two come from?" he wondered aloud. Of course, they didn't answer. Instead, the larger twin pointed toward the door, then made a sweeping gesture, as if mimicking the storm outside. Ethan frowned. "Were you lost? Or are you running from something?" The twins didn't respond, but their eyes seemed to darken at his question. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but one thing was clear: they needed help, and he was the only one here to give it. As the night wore on, Ethan noticed more details about his unexpected guests. Their glowing skin pulsed in rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, and their large eyes reflected the faint light of the heater. They didn't speak, but their expressions and gestures were filled with emotion. They were intelligent, that much was obvious, and despite their alien appearance, there was something undeniably human about them. Ethan sat across from them, watching as they slowly began to relax. The smaller twin yawned, curling up against their sibling. A wave of protectiveness washed over him. They were just kids, scared, hungry, and far from home. As the storm raged outside, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. He didn't know where these twins had come from, or why they were here, but something told him their arrival wasn't an accident. For now, all he could do was keep them safe. As he stoked the fire, Ethan glanced at the twins one more time. Their glowing skin flickered softly, casting faint shadows on the walls. "I don't know who you are," he murmured, "but I promise I'll do my best to protect you." Outside, the storm howled louder, as if the planet itself was warning him of what was to come. The struggle for trust. Ethan woke up to the faint hum of the cabin's heater and the eerie glow of his two unexpected guests. The alien twins were sitting on the floor, huddled together, their luminous skin dim and flickering like a fading firefly. They watched him closely, their large eyes unblinking, as if weighing whether he was a threat or a savior. He stretched, feeling the stiffness in his back from sleeping on the old cot. "Well," he said, his voice breaking the silence, "looks like we're all still here." The twins flinched at the sound, their glowing patterns shifting like ripples in a pond. Ethan held up his hands. "Easy, easy. I'm not gonna hurt you." He moved slowly to the small kitchen area and started rummaging through his supplies. His rations were already limited, but there was no way he could ignore their hollow eyes and trembling bodies. He pulled out a can of soup, cracked it open, and poured it into a pot over the heater. The aroma filled the small cabin, and the twins tilted their heads, their noses twitching. "Smells good, huh?" Ethan said, trying to sound casual. He poured the steaming soup into 2 metal cups and placed them on the floor. "Here. It's not much, but it'll warm you up." The twins hesitated, glancing at each other. The smaller one reached out first, their delicate fingers brushing against the cup. They pulled back, startled by the heat, then tried again, more carefully this time. Ethan couldn't help but smile as they took a tentative sip, their glowing skin brightening slightly with each mouthful. "You're welcome," he muttered, though he doubted they understood him. As they ate, Ethan studied them more closely. Their glowing skin wasn't just a simple light. It pulsed and shifted with their emotions. When they were scared, it dimmed. When they seemed curious, it flickered brighter. It was like watching a living, breathing mood ring. "What happened to you two?" he asked softly, though he knew he wouldn't get an answer. His eyes drifted to the strange markings on their arms, intricate patterns that looked almost like a language. Were they scars, tattoos, or something else entirely? The larger twin noticed him staring and quickly covered their arm with their other hand. The gesture was unmistakable. Fear. Ethan leaned back, holding up his hands again. "It's okay. I'm not gonna ask questions you don't want to answer." But the question lingered in his mind. Where had they come from? And what, or who, had left those marks? The day passed slowly, the storm outside showing no signs of letting up. Ethan tried to keep busy, fixing a broken cabinet hinge and checking the solar batteries that powered his cabin. The twins stayed close to each other, their eyes tracking his every move. It was like having 2 wild animals in the house, curious but ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan decided to try something different. He grabbed an old sketch pad and a pencil from a drawer and sat down on the floor a few feet from the twins. "Okay," he said, tapping the pencil against the pad. "Let's see if we can communicate." He started with something simple, a picture of a tree. He held it up for the twins to see, then pointed to the small potted plant on the windowsill. "Tree," he said slowly. The smaller twin tilted their head, their glowing skin flickering softly. They reached out and touched the sketchpad, then looked up at Ethan. He handed them the pencil, curious to see what they would do. At first, they just held it awkwardly, as if unsure how it worked. But then, with a surprising level of precision, they began to draw. Ethan watched in awe as the pencil moved across the page, creating a swirling, intricate pattern that looked almost like the markings on their skin. "Wow," he breathed. "That's incredible." The smaller twin handed the sketchpad back to him, their glowing skin brightening slightly. Ethan stared at the drawing, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just random shades. It looked like a map, or maybe a star chart. Before he could ask, the larger twins suddenly tensed, their glowing patterns flickering wildly. They pointed toward the window, their eyes wide with fear. Ethan froze, listening. At first, he heard nothing but the wind. Then, faintly, he caught the sound of something metallic, a high-pitched whir, growing louder. Drones. Ethan's heart raced as he grabbed his old rifle from the corner of the cabin. He hadn't used it in years, but the weight of it in his hands felt reassuring. "Stay here," he said firmly, though he doubted they understood. He stepped outside into the freezing night, his breath clouding in the air. The sky was dark, the storm still raging, but he could see the faint glint of something moving in the distance. A red light blinked, scanning the ground like a predator searching for prey. Ethan gripped the rifle tighter, his mind racing. Whoever, or whatever, was out there, they were looking for the twins, and they weren't going to stop until they found them. Back inside the cabin, the twins huddled together, their glowing skin dim with fear. Ethan glanced at them, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. He had no idea what he'd gotten himself into, but one thing was clear. These twins weren't just lost. They were being hunted. A mysterious pursuit. The eerie calm of the morning was broken by a sound Ethan hadn't heard in years, a sharp mechanical buzz slicing through the stillness. He bolted upright from his chair, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle propped against the wall. The twins, who had been huddled near the heater, stiffened. Their glowing patterns flickered erratically, like a warning signal. Ethan moved to the window, peering out through the frosted glass. At first, he saw nothing but the snow-covered landscape. Then he spotted it, a sleek, black drone hovering low to the ground, its red sensor light sweeping the area like a predator searching for prey. It was methodical, deliberate, scanning every rock and crevice as it advanced toward the cabin. "Stay quiet," Ethan whispered, glancing back at the twins. Their glowing skin dimmed to a faint shimmer, and they pressed themselves into the shadows, their wide eyes fixed on him. Ethan's mind raced. The drones meant someone, or something, was actively hunting the twins. But who? And why? His cabin was remote, far from any official trade routes or settlements. For years, he had been a ghost to the galaxy. Now, danger was at his doorstep. He grabbed his rifle, the cold metal heavy in his hands, and crept to the back door. Pushing it open silently, he stepped out into the biting wind. The snow crunched under his boots as he made his way around the side of the cabin, keeping low. The drone was closer now, its red light reflecting off the icy ground. Ethan took cover behind a large boulder, his heart pounding. Carefully, he raised his rifle, squinting through the iron sights. The drone was sleek and advanced, its movements precise and almost organic. He knew one shot wouldn't take it down unless he hit a critical point. His finger hovered over the trigger, waiting for the perfect moment. Suddenly, the larger twin appeared at the cabin door, their glowing patterns flashing brightly in a chaotic dance. They were trying to warn him. Ethan's stomach dropped as he realized why. There wasn't just one drone. Two more appeared from the north, their sensors converging on the cabin. "Damn it," Ethan muttered, lowering the rifle. He couldn't fight them all. Not with his outdated weapon and no backup. His only option was to run. He sprinted back to the cabin, the cold air burning his lungs. "We're leaving now," he said, grabbing a worn backpack and shoving what little food and supplies he had inside. The twins hesitated, their eyes darting to the windows where the red lights of the drones grew brighter. "I know you're scared," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But if we stay here, they'll find us." The smaller twin reached out and touched his arm, their glowing patterns calming slightly. Ethan nodded, slinging the backpack over his shoulder. "Good. Let's go." The trio slipped out the back of the cabin, moving quickly but carefully across the snowy terrain. Ethan led the way, his rifle ready, scanning the area for more drones. The twins followed closely, their glowing skin now dimmed to near invisibility. He marveled at their ability to adapt, but there was no time to dwell on it. They headed toward the mountains in the distance, where Ethan knew of an abandoned outpost tucked into a narrow valley. It wasn't much, but it was better than being out in the open. The trek was grueling, the cold sapping their strength with every step. Ethan glanced back occasionally, his heart sinking each time he saw the twins struggling to keep up. "Come on," he urged, his voice firm but encouraging. Just a little farther. Behind them, the drones were relentless. Their red lights danced across the snow, and the sharp buzz of their engines grew louder. Ethan knew they couldn't outrun them forever. He needed a distraction. "Stay here," he whispered, motioning for the twins to crouch behind a rocky outcrop. The larger twin clutched the smaller one protectively, their glowing patterns flickering with anxiety. Ethan pulled a flare from his backpack, one of the few pieces of emergency equipment he had left. Striking it against the rock, he tossed it as far as he could in the opposite direction. The flare hissed and sparked, its bright light drawing the drones like moths to a flame. "Move," Ethan said, helping the twins to their feet. They took off again, their breaths visible in the freezing air. The mountains loomed closer, their jagged peaks a beacon of hope. But as they neared the base, a shadow passed over them. Ethan looked up and saw it, a larger drone, almost the size of a small ship, hovering above the valley. Its red sensors locked onto them, and a low mechanical voice echoed through the air. "Target acquired. Prepare for retrieval." The twins froze, their glowing patterns flaring wildly in panic. Ethan stepped in front of them, his rifle raised. "Not on my watch," he growled. The drone began to descend, its engines whirring ominously. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. He didn't know how they were going to survive this, but one thing was clear. He wasn't about to let these kids fall into the hands of whoever was hunting them. The fight for their freedom had just begun. Escape into the unknown. The outpost stood like a forgotten monument at the base of the mountains, its steel walls battered by time and weather. Ethan stared at it through the swirling snow, his breath visible in the freezing air. It was a place he had sworn never to return to, a relic of humanity's first failed attempts to tame this planet. But now, it was their only hope. Behind him, the alien twins struggled to keep up, their glowing patterns dimmed to almost nothing. They were exhausted, their small bodies shivering from the relentless cold. Ethan dropped his pack and knelt down, motioning for them to come closer. "We're almost there," he said, his voice low but firm. "You just have to hold on a little longer." The larger twin nodded, their wide, luminous eyes filled with determination despite their fear. The smaller one clung to their sibling, their faint glow flickering like a dying ember. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. These kids didn't deserve this, but guilt wasn't going to keep them alive. He hoisted the pack onto his shoulders and led them to the outpost. The entrance was buried under a layer of snow and ice, but the faint outline of a door was still visible. Ethan pulled out his multi-tool and began chipping away at the frozen barrier. Each strike echoed through the desolate valley, a reminder of how alone they truly were. "Hurry," he muttered to himself, glancing over his shoulder. The smaller drones had been diverted by his flare, but the larger one, the one that had spoken, was still out there, hunting them like a predator stalking its prey. Finally, the door groaned open, revealing a dark corridor that smelled of rust and decay. Ethan ushered the twins inside, pulling the door shut behind them. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by their labored breathing. The interior was as grim as he remembered. Flickering lights, broken equipment, and walls stained with years of neglect. Ethan lit a small lantern from his pack, its soft glow casting long shadows across the room. "This isn't home," he said, mostly to himself, "but it's safe. For now." The twins looked around, their glowing patterns reflecting off the metal walls. The smaller ones seemed to relax slightly, their glow brightening as they curiously touched an old console. Ethan watched them, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Even in the face of danger, they were still just kids, curious and full of wonder. But the moment of calm didn't last. A distant hum reached Ethan's ears, faint but unmistakable. The large drone was getting closer. He moved quickly, searching the outpost for anything that could help. Most of the equipment was useless, but in a dusty corner he found an old power generator. It sputtered to life with a few sharp kicks, sending a faint charge through the outpost. "Let's see if this still works," he muttered, powering up a long-dead communication terminal. The screen flickered on, displaying a garbled interface. Ethan's fingers flew over the keys, bypassing security protocols and searching for a functional channel. If he could send a distress signal to one of the nearby colonies, there might be a chance they'd send help. But as he worked, the larger twin tugged on his sleeve, their glowing patterns flashing urgently. They pointed to the window, a small reinforced pane of glass that offered a view of the outside world. Ethan followed their gaze and felt his stomach drop. The drone was here. Its massive frame hovered just above the outpost, red lights scanning the area. Ethan could hear the faint whir of its engines as it descended, casting an ominous shadow over the valley. He turned back to the twins, his mind racing. The outpost had no weapons, no defenses. If the drone broke through, they were finished. But then he noticed something strange. The smaller twin was staring at the console, their glowing patterns shifting into a complex sequence of shapes and lines. Ethan didn't understand what it meant, but he could feel the tension in the air as the twin placed their hand on the console's surface. The screen lit up, displaying symbols and data Ethan couldn't read. The twins' glow intensified, their patterns moving faster and faster until the entire room was bathed in their light. Ethan shielded his eyes, his heart pounding. "What are you doing?" he whispered. The console beeped, and a holographic map appeared, showing the surrounding terrain and a network of underground tunnels leading deep into the mountains. Ethan's eyes widened. "You can control this place?" he asked, though he wasn't sure if they understood. The larger twin grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. They didn't need words to communicate their urgency. The map was their escape route, and the clock was ticking. Ethan grabbed his pack and followed them into the tunnels, the faint light from their glowing patterns guiding the way. Behind them, the outpost shuddered as the drone began its assault, the sound of metal tearing echoing through the corridors. "Keep moving," Ethan shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls. The tunnels were narrow and winding, but the map had shown a clear path to a hidden exit on the other side of the mountains. If they could reach it, they might just have a chance. As they ran, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a simple chase. The twins weren't just being hunted. They were key to something much larger, something he didn't yet understand. And whatever it was, he knew it would change everything. The twins' secret. The tunnels were silent, save for the sound of Ethan's labored breathing and the faint rhythmic hum of the twins' glowing patterns. They had been running for what felt like hours, weaving through the maze of underground passageways revealed by the holographic map. The further they went, the more Ethan realized these tunnels weren't natural. They were constructed. By who, or for what purpose, he couldn't yet tell. Finally, they reached a cavernous chamber where the air was warmer, and the walls shimmered with veins of a strange, glowing crystal. The twins stopped abruptly, their glowing skin pulsing in sync with the crystals, as if they were connected somehow. Ethan staggered to a halt behind them, leaning on his knees to catch his breath. "This isn't on any map I've ever seen," he muttered. The larger twin stepped forward, their glowing patterns shifting into a complex sequence that seemed deliberate, purposeful. They placed their hand on the crystal wall, and to Ethan's shock, the surface rippled like water. The smaller twin joined them, and together, their combined glow intensified until the entire chamber was bathed in light. Ethan shielded his eyes as the crystals began to hum, vibrating with a deep, resonant frequency. Suddenly, the wall opened, revealing a hidden room filled with ancient technology. Strange consoles, hovering orbs, and intricate carvings lined the walls, all glowing faintly with the same blue light as the twins. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, stepping cautiously into the room. The air felt different here, thicker, heavier, as if the room itself was alive. The smaller twin moved to the center of the room, where a large pedestal stood. On it was an orb, faintly pulsating with energy. The twin placed their hands on it, and a series of holographic images filled the air. Ethan's jaw dropped as the images began to tell a story. He saw a thriving alien civilization, their cities powered by the same glowing crystals that surrounded him now. The twin species had once been the guardians of this energy, using it to heal, grow, and sustain life. But then, another force appeared, shadowy figures with advanced machines, intent on harnessing the energy for their own gain. Ethan watched in horror as the images showed the invaders capturing and enslaving the glowing beings, draining their energy to power massive weapons and ships. The devastation was unimaginable. Entire cities fell, and the few survivors were forced to flee, scattering across the stars. The hologram faded, leaving Ethan in stunned silence. He turned to the twins, who were now staring at him with solemn expressions. You're the last of your kind. He realized, the weight of the revelation hitting him like a punch to the gut. That's why they're hunting you. You're not just running, you're hiding. The larger twin nodded slowly, their glowing patterns dimming with sadness. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. They want to use you, he said, pacing the room. They want your energy, your power. That's why those drones were after you. The smaller twin touched his arm, their glow soft and reassuring. Ethan looked down at them, his anger giving way to determination. I don't know how I'm going to stop them, he said, but I'm not letting them take you. Not while I'm still breathing. The twins exchanged a glance, their patterns shifting into a new sequence. The pedestal lit up again, this time displaying a map of the surrounding area. Ethan recognized the mountains and the valley where his cabin was located, but there was something else, a symbol, glowing brightly, deep within the range. What's that? He asked, pointing to the symbol. The smaller twin tapped the orb, and another hologram appeared. It showed a massive structure buried beneath the mountains. It was clearly ancient, but its design was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The energy pulsing through its walls matched the twins' glow perfectly. It's a power source, Ethan guessed, trying to make sense of the image. The twins nodded, their patterns brightening with urgency. Ethan's eyes widened. You think we can use it to stop them? The larger twin pointed to the hologram, then to Ethan, their glowing patterns shifting in a way that almost seemed hopeful. He understood. The structure wasn't just a power source. It was a weapon, or perhaps a shield. Something capable of protecting them, if they could reach it in time. Ethan slung his pack over his shoulder and checked his rifle. All right, he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. Let's move. If that thing is our best shot at keeping you safe, then we're going to get to it, no matter what's waiting for us out there. The twins' glow brightened, and for the first time, Ethan saw something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope. It was fragile, but it was enough. As they stepped back into the tunnels, the hum of the crystals followed them, like a song guiding them toward their destiny. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the invaders knew about the structure too, and that they weren't far behind. The final stand. The cavern shuddered as Ethan and the twins emerged from the tunnels into the freezing twilight. The structure they had seen in the holograms loomed ahead, half buried in ice and rock, its jagged spires glowing faintly with the same blue light that pulsed through the twins' skin. It was ancient, immense, and alive with a quiet power that made the hair on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. This is it, Ethan muttered, tightening his grip on his rifle. He glanced at the twins, their glowing patterns now flickering with both urgency and fear. The air around the structure seemed to hum, resonating with their presence. They belonged here in a way Ethan couldn't begin to comprehend. The hum of approaching drones snapped him back to the moment. Ethan scanned the horizon. Red lights were closing in from the west, cutting through the snowy dusk. A low, mechanical roar echoed from above, as the massive hunter drone descended from the clouds, its spotlight sweeping the frozen ground. "They're here," Ethan growled. He knelt beside the twins, his voice firm but steady. "Listen, we don't have much time. Whatever this place is, it's your best shot. You have to activate it. I'll hold them off as long as I can." The twins exchanged a look, their glowing patterns shifting into a synchronized rhythm. They understood. The smaller twin reached out, touching Ethan's arm briefly, their light flaring in what felt like gratitude. Then, without a word, they sprinted toward the structure, their glowing forms disappearing into the icy shadows. Ethan exhaled sharply, his breath clouding in the cold air. He turned back toward the drones, his heart pounding. They were closer now, their red sensors locking onto him. The hunter drone hovered overhead, its massive frame casting a dark shadow over the snow. "All right," Ethan muttered, shouldering his rifle. "Let's see how tough you are." He aimed at the lead drone and fired. The shot rang out, and the bullet struck true, shattering the drone's sensor. It spiraled out of control, crashing into the snow with a fiery explosion. But the victory was short-lived. 2 more drones appeared from the ridge, their engines screaming as they descended. Ethan ducked behind a boulder, reloading as red laser bolts scorched the ground around him. He peeked out, taking another shot and clipping one of the drone's wings. It wobbled but managed to stay airborne. Above, the hunter drone unleashed a piercing shriek, its spotlight zeroing in on the entrance to the structure. Ethan's stomach tightened. They weren't after him. They were after the twins. "Not today," he growled. Grabbing a flare from his pack, he struck it against the rock and hurled it toward the drones. The bright fiery light drew their attention, giving Ethan a brief window to reposition. He sprinted toward a narrow ridge, taking cover behind a jagged outcrop. The drones adjusted, their sensors scanning for him again. One fired a pulse of energy, and the blast sent snow and debris flying in every direction. Ethan barely managed to stay on his feet. "Come on, you overgrown tin cans," he muttered, firing another shot. The bullet hit its mark, and a second drone crashed to the ground in a fiery burst. Suddenly, a low rumble emanated from the structure. Ethan turned, his eyes widening as the spires began to glow brighter, the same rhythmic pulse as the twins' patterns. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and a beam of blue light shot into the sky, splitting the storm clouds above. The drones faltered, their movements erratic as if disrupted by the energy. The hunter drone unleashed a deafening roar, its massive frame descending toward the structure. Ethan fired at it, but his bullets barely scratched its armor. It unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, and Ethan dove for cover as the ground exploded around him. Inside the structure, the twins stood before a massive console, their glowing hands pressed against its surface. Symbols and patterns swirled around them, the ancient technology responding to their touch. The smaller twin let out a soft, musical hum, and the entire chamber lit up, sending waves of energy rippling outward. Ethan felt the shockwave pass through him, a strange warmth that seemed to resonate with the very core of his being. The drones, however, weren't so fortunate. The smaller ones short-circuited, their engines sputtering before they crashed into the snow. The hunter drone wobbled, its lights flickering as it tried to resist the disruption. "Keep going," Ethan shouted, his voice carried by the rising wind. He fired another shot, aiming for a weak spot in the hunter drone's armor. The bullet hit, and sparks erupted from its side, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. The twins' glow intensified, their patterns now blindingly bright. The structure responded in kind, the spires emitting a deep, resonant hum that grew louder with each passing second. Ethan could feel the energy building, a storm of power ready to be unleashed. The hunter drone launched a final, desperate attack, its cannons aimed directly at the structure. Ethan stood his ground, firing shot after shot to draw its fire. "Come on, you ugly bastard," he yelled. The drone turned its attention to him, its cannon charging with deadly energy. But before it could fire, the structure released its full power. A massive pulse of blue light erupted from the spires, engulfing the drone in a wave of energy. The machine let out a piercing screech as it disintegrated, its metal frame reduced to ash in an instant. The pulse spread across the valley, silencing the storm and leaving an eerie calm in its wake. Ethan lowered his rifle, his ears ringing from the blast. The structure's glow began to fade, and the twins emerged from the entrance, their pattern soft and steady. Ethan dropped to his knees, exhausted but alive. He looked up at the twins, a faint smile breaking through his tired expression. "You did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You stopped them." The twins approached him, their glowing hands reaching out to help him stand. As he looked into their eyes, he realized something profound. They hadn't just saved themselves. They had saved him too, in more ways than one. Found family. The silence after the battle was almost surreal. The valley, once filled with the roar of drones and the hum of energy weapons, was now quiet except for the soft whistle of the wind. Ethan stood in the shadow of the glowing structure, his breath visible in the cold air. His rifle hung loosely in his hand, useless now, but he couldn't bring himself to let it go just yet. The twins emerged from the structure's entrance, their glowing patterns faint but steady. Their exhaustion was evident, but so was the pride in their luminous eyes. Ethan gave them a weary smile, though he could barely stand himself. "You too did it," he said, his voice hoarse. "You stopped them." The smaller twin approached him, their glow pulsing faintly. They'd reached out and touched his arm, their light flickering in a rhythmic pattern that felt comforting. It wasn't words, but Ethan understood. It was gratitude, relief, and something deeper, something like trust. Before he could respond, a faint crackle came from his communicator. He had forgotten it was in his pack, but now it buzzed to life, the static clearing to reveal a voice. "This is the Alpha Colony Rescue Team. We received your distress signal. Is anyone there?" Ethan fumbled with the device, his hands shaking. "This is Ethan Voss," he said. "I'm here, and so are 2 survivors." He glanced at the twins, unsure of how to explain them. "We need evac. It's urgent." The voice on the other end hesitated before replying. "We're tracking your signal now. ETA 15 minutes. Hang tight." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. 15 minutes felt like an eternity, but it was something. He turned to the twins. "Help's on the way. We'll be safe soon." But the twins didn't seem reassured. The larger one pointed to the sky, where the faint silhouette of a massive ship began to emerge from the clouds. It wasn't human. Its jagged, ominous design matched the drones that had hunted them. Ethan's relief turned to dread. "They're sending reinforcements," he muttered, his grip tightening on his rifle. He looked at the twins, their glowing patterns now flickering with urgency. "We're not out of this yet." The structure, sensing the threat, began to hum again, its spires glowing brighter. The twins stepped forward, their glowing hands raised toward the sky. Ethan watched as the ground beneath the structure shifted, revealing an array of ancient defenses, turrets and energy cannons that hummed to life, aiming at the descending ship. The larger twin glanced back at Ethan, their glow steady. They were asking for his trust. He nodded, stepping back as they moved toward the console inside the structure. The smaller twin joined them, their patterns sensing in perfect harmony. The ship above unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, but the structure's shields flared to life, absorbing the attack. The twins worked quickly, their hands moving over the console as if they had done this 1,000 times. The spires emitted a deep, resonant hum that grew louder with each passing second. Ethan's communicator crackled again. "Ethan, this is the rescue team. We've got a visual on the enemy ship. Hold your position. We're engaging now." Through the haze of fear and chaos, Ethan felt a spark of hope. "We're holding, but you'd better be quick," he replied, watching as the twins activated another sequence on the console. The structure's defenses fired, beams of blue energy streaking through the sky and striking the ship's hull. The enemy ship retaliated, its weapons targeting the structure. The ground shook with each impact, and Ethan could feel the strain on the shields. He gritted his teeth, willing the twins to finish whatever they were doing. Finally, the humming reached a crescendo, and the twins placed their hands together on the console. The structure emitted a massive pulse of energy, brighter and more powerful than anything Ethan had seen before. The pulse hit the enemy ship, ripping through its armor and sending it spiraling out of control. It crashed into the mountains with a deafening roar, flames and debris scattering across the snow. The silence returned, broken only by the distant hum of the approaching rescue ship. Ethan lowered his rifle, his shoulders sagging with relief. The twins stepped away from the console, their glow faint but steady. They looked at Ethan, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. The rescue ship landed nearby, its engines kicking up snow as a team of humans disembarked. "Mr. Voss," one of them called, scanning the area. "We're here to extract you." Ethan motioned to the twins. "Them too," he said firmly. "They're coming with me." The rescue team hesitated, their eyes widening as they noticed the twins. One of the soldiers spoke into their communicator, clearly relaying the situation to someone higher up. After a tense moment, they nodded. "Understood. All of you aboard." As Ethan and the twins climbed into the ship, he felt a strange sense of peace. The fight was over. For now. The twins sat close to him, their glowing patterns calm and steady. They had saved him as much as he had saved them. As the ship ascended, Ethan looked at the twins and smiled. "Guess we're family now," he said. The smaller twin tilted their head, their glow brightening slightly as they mimicked the word. "Family." Ethan chuckled, leaning back in his seat. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone.